We need to often go back to the beginning because many Canadians haven't had the opportunity to learn or understand these stories. So we start at the beginning and we make sure they feel comfortable. They feel comfortable not knowing. Wherever you are in your understanding of Canadian history, that's okay. And let's start together and move forward together. So making sure also that we understand that the students often have a ton of knowledge that they bring, and making sure the opportunities for sharing that knowledge in the community are given so teacher candidates have the practice of sharing with their colleagues and learning together.
I find that through literacy, students do begin to dialogue and question about the issues that we're so keen to have them engage in. Also, as educators, one of our hopes is that not only during the time that we have our teacher candidates in Education 440, but as they move into their early career teaching and throughout their life, that we will have helped develop an interest and a habit in continuing to engage in authentic Indigenous literature. Interestingly enough, Education 440 is not just about improving educational outcomes for Indigenous students. If we think of all students within that lens, in Education 440 we spend quite a bit of time looking at the First Nations principles of learning and bringing our work back into that and pulling apart how we might incorporate those principles into our teaching and instruction. So for example, one of the principles of learning says that learning requires time and patience. That will improve the outcomes for our Indigenous students, but it will improve the outcomes for all of our students. Another one of the principles says that students need to recognize their own identity and to become aware of it. Again, that will hugely improve the educational outcomes for Indigenous students and all students.
Right from the beginning of my work with WECTEP each year, I identify myself as a settler educator. And by doing that work right away, I acknowledge the privilege that I have, and that the work that I need to do is really something I've only come to understand both the older I get and the more that I've been working with Indigenous communities and elders, and learning and coming to understand more deeply what colonialism is and the impacts it's had both historically but also currently. And so the first step for me in this work is being reflexive and vulnerable publicly with students to make a space to disrupt what we don't even realize is a colonizing system, colonizing practices, and that much of what we think is incredibly important and helpful in education is actually steeped in reprivileging and reproducing hierarchies that recognize or think of indigeneity and other groups that are not the dominant group as lower than others. And so the work that we do in WECTEP is really about deconstructing, disassembling, and reconstructing or reconstituting our understandings in relationship to the place that we're in, the local nations that are there, and also recognizing that the acts that we take are not just personal, but also professional in our classrooms and part of structural things that happen. Something that I've learned is really important is that we discuss the truth in Truth and Reconciliation, current truths like boiling water advisories and the lack of good faith in not just living up to treaties, which you don't have many of in BC, but just original connections between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, which was originally about relationship and partnership. Another thing I've come to understand is it's really important to highlight positive current Indigenous stories so that all youth, particularly Indigenous youth, see themselves in others and see success in the stories of others.
Lots of choices to learn about colonial history. So, for example, they could choose to take an online open course. Those cover lots of the history of Canada and Canada's troubled relationship with Indigenous peoples. They could join a book club. I know that lots of school districts are taking that up, and so they could learn about colonial history and current realities, and then they could also choose to research for themselves, so personally, starting maybe with like the Truth and Reconciliation website and then following links, and perhaps taking up listening to podcasts from current Indigenous podcasters, like Chelsea Vowell, for example. There's a whole array of choices for people now, which is exciting.
I think to bring in cultural understanding of Indigenous groups in our classroom, we need to start from where we are. So, where are you teaching? What place do you live in? Are there Indigenous communities right around you? Do you know the languages that may be around you? Can you access the knowledge holders that your district has in place? The people, the cultural people that may be part of your school district already. If you are unable to access directly local knowledge, you can move in concentric circles outward until you do find something that is available to you. So there's lots of information out there now, and I don't think it's difficult to find. It's more, how do you choose? So you do have supports in your classroom, you have supports in your schools, in your district, and in your community. And I think teacher candidates are learning in WECTEP to access all of those opportunities and to not think of the classroom as a closed space, but an open space where you can bring knowledge and understanding by accessing your supports. To include Indigenous cultures and Indigenous students' backgrounds and making sure that's part of our learning, we, as a call to action, we are encouraging intercultural understanding for all Canadians, all newcomers, by making sure that we understand our first multiculturalism, which was the Indigenous cultures that have been here from time immemorial.
I understand that I need to have the voices, faces, and stories of Indigenous folk in my teaching so that my Indigenous students see them as successful and my non-Indigenous students recognize that Indigenous peoples are successful and contributing to society in powerful ways.